Yes, Dan Wilson. I live here in Austin, Texas. I work downtown at a company called Mutual Mobile. I'm a leader on our web development team, which basically means I spend my days talking to designers, working in the browser, working in Cordova, working in React Native, deciding what makes sense for what platform and what all platforms, and uh, a lot of architecture and all those kinds of things. But what I really love and what I want to discuss today, do you know what it is? That's right, animation. That is right. So there's a new way to do animation. It's called the Web Animations API, and we'll just kind of jump into it. So we're going to focus a lot on what and how today, maybe not so much why. For me, animation is a lot of fun. Animation, I think, has a huge purpose and should not be thought of as an afterthought. But as a developer, we're going to focus on how we get that technically implemented. So using the current methods, what options do we have for animating today? We've got just straight up set timeout, set interval, not recommended. It's not going to give you any kind of performance. It's not going to do much for you, but it is a way to animate, and it was one of the early ways to do it. jQuery Animate is another way. This was one of the first ones that really got animation, people thinking about animation in the browser, because it was easy to do. You just say what you wanted to go to, how long you wanted to get there, and it would do it for you. It's had performance issues in the past. A lot of those have been resolved or remedied as jQuery has grown and come into the version 3.0, but it still requires jQuery. It still may not give you everything that you need. Request animation frame, a different kind of mindset, but in the same vein as set interval, you're just asking the browser whenever it thinks it can update, you draw something new on the screen. Allows the browser to optimize and get the performance that you might want, but you do lose some of the options of ease that you might get from just saying go from here to here. CSS transitions and keyframe animations, personal favorite. You get some nice performance boost if you know what you're doing and how to optimize that for browsers. But you do, in the move from declarative to CSS from JavaScript, which is the first three of JavaScript, you do lose the ability to always get all your variables, change where you're starting from, where you're going to, without also writing in JavaScript. SVG animation, very powerful. You have a lot of options, but it's limited to the realm of SVG and not your normal DOM. And then there's libraries like GreenSock, which have been tested and tried and true, and they do a lot of stuff, but it's still an external library, still pulling in whatever the file size is, and so you have your pros and cons on all of these. So naturally, what we want is another option, and that's why we have the Web Animations API. This one's a little different, though. It's not just adding another thing. The whole idea behind this is to unite the various SVG, CSS, and JavaScript ways to animate. So that's exciting. So the Web Animations API. Again, combining the benefits of SVG, CSS, and JavaScript. So CSS, you can get some off-main thread hardware acceleration if you're using kind of will change or the old translate 3D type approach. You can move that from CSS. You now can get that through JavaScript. Dynamic values, again, if you just want to do math.random for how long animation lasts, you just throw that in there. You get timelines and playback control. So you're not just saying start this animation, you're now saying start this animation, and when I click this button, go to 500 milliseconds into that animation, rewind, fast forward, increase the speed, and some unified callbacks for when it finishes, when it's canceled, and more. So as I said, this is emerging, this is new, and so there's limited amounts that are available today. In Chrome and Opera, they have pieces implemented. Firefox is coming soon. In fact, it should be out in the next version, which is slated to be released in August, which means that Firefox is going to have a little bit more than Chrome and Opera currently have. And again, since this is all about uniting how these methods work and give you more options, how Chrome is implementing the API, there's a link in this slide deck for specifics about how they're doing their rendering engine. And Firefox is supposedly doing a very similar approach where whether you use CSS animation or this Web Animations API through JavaScript, you're actually using the same underlying engine. So that's where this is helping browser developers give you more options, but they're only focusing on that core. So again, this is only available in certain browsers, but there is a polyfill available, which does mean adding an external resource, but it does let you play with it today. And that's one of my favorite things about these new technologies is when we've got something like a polyfill, we are introducing new stuff for the native, at the native layer of a browser. And it lets us try out things, and it lets libraries like GreenSock tie into those and then iterate and innovate even more because they're not having to focus on cross-browser other things. You can start using more of what the browser provides. So how do we do this? It is a really nice screen. So if you want to do the Web Animations API, there's one key thing that you should focus on, at least at first. There's a lot of other ways to do it, but the primary way to make an animation is to call .animate on an element. So here, we've got, I'm creating a variable, storing a reference for this animation in a variable called anim, and I'm getting an element by ID, and I have that element, and then I call .animate on it. And .animate takes two parameters. It takes an array of keyframes. So in this case, a start and an end, and I'm starting at a transform of scale of 1, and then ending at a transform scale of 0.6. And the little dot at the bottom is doing this animation. And it's using the Web Animations API. Yeah. The second parameter is a collection of timing options. And this, if you're familiar with CSS, all of this might look familiar. We break out duration in milliseconds, iterations can be infinity or a specific number, integer. Direction, so in this case it's normal, it's just doing it one direction. Fill, where it starts and ends, what shows when it starts and ends. This is an infinite, so the fill is actually not needed in this case, but again, that's something that you already have in CSS keyframe animations. A delay of when to start the animation after you kick it off, so this one will wait 10 milliseconds before starting, and an easing to say how it moves through time. But you don't just have to do a start and an end. You don't just have to do one property. You can do multiple things. So here we've got 4 properties, or 4 keyframes that we're going through, and we're changing the scale, we're changing the opacity, and I'm also specifying an offset. This is basically where it appears in time, so 0 to 1. So at 0.33, that's a third, 0.6667, that's 2/3 through the animation, it changes to those properties. And then the duration, iterations, again, same kind of thing. So I've mentioned, if you're familiar with CSS, that might look familiar. This is an equivalent in CSS with some weird brackets to make it fit on this screen nicely. But the screen is so nice, I could have just put them on new lines. But again, we have all of our same things here. We've got our keyframes, we've got our offsets and the 0%, and we've got our different duration delays, etc. So you might be wondering, if it already has an equivalent in CSS, why go to this whole new method in JavaScript? And you don't have to. And in a lot of cases, it might not make sense. CSS animations are can be straightforward and simple. But if you need a little bit extra, you might try the API. And so you're getting the hardware acceleration still, and you're also getting, as I've mentioned a couple times before, you've got variables. So I'm not just going from scale 1 to scale 0.6. I might be doing scale 1 to something that a user has entered into a text field at 0.4, and then I can make it go from 1 to 0.4. Whereas declarative with CSS, you're going to have to specify multiple keyframes for all of those different values that you want. Or use JavaScript to generate new style sheets. But again, if you're already in there, then you might try doing this. And you also get the player controls. So here's an example of a animation. We've got a few properties on an animation once you've created it. So you call element.animate, and it stores it into a variable. And you can call animation.currentTime. It's a read-only, it's write-read, sorry, not read-only, it's write-read. So you can say equals 200, and that animation is going to jump to 200 milliseconds. Or you can read it and see where it is in the timeline. You can sync multiple animations together through this. So for example, here are two random animations that are using the same keyframes, but they had a different delay. And if I press this sync button, I can sync them just by setting the current time of the second one to be the same as the first one. That's something that if you dynamically created a new CSS animation, you wouldn't be able to get the timelines matched like that. And the max value here is just going to be the combination of delay, duration, and iterations. And again, if I randomize it, I can set that current time to whatever I want, sync it again, and they're back. Should also say this slide deck has multiple links to different code pins. Some of them are embedded in here, but some of them you can view later. So in addition to reading the current time, you can also get information about the play state, whether it's running, whether it's paused, whether it's waiting to start, whether it's ended. And you can get that information through the animation.playstate property. That's read-only, but you do have functions to call to trigger that. So you can pause, play, cancel, or finish. If you call cancel or finish, that will trigger a callback that you can set up on the on cancel or on finish. And that's a way that you can start doing chaining animations together and a lot of other options. Playback rate. Here's an animation that's going at 1x, and now it's going at 0.3x. And all I'm changing, instead of duration or changing how the easing is or anything like that, I'm just setting the playback rate property and setting it to 0.25 or 0.3 in this case. And so if it's less than 1, it's going to be slower. 1.5, that's going to be 50% faster. Your current time will account for playback rate. So current time is not just seconds that pass. It's actually where it appears in there. So if I'm going at 5 times the speed, current time will go through 5 seconds every second. And I meant to click on this beforehand. Switch over here. So again, another example here. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 circles that are animating. And I've got little pause and 2x buttons that I can play. And so if what I'm calling the head of this body walking, I pause that one, it can pause. I can switch the body to 2 times as fast. And a lot of different options. And that's just calling those different properties and setting those values on them. So right there, we've already seen kind of how this extends what you might have seen in CSS animations. But what are the catches? I've already mentioned the native browser support. Chrome, Opera, and basically almost the latest Firefox have the initial support, and they all support this .animate, everything that we talked about. But this is even just a subset of what the Web Animations API. This is kind of the first version that they're rolling out and then building on it over time. This is kind of the, let's get it like CSS Animations and give it this little extra player control. And then all the other big ideas we're going to build out as they go along. The spec's not final. It's in pretty good shape, but there's always the chance that things will change. The polyfill will be changing as well as the spec grows and as the implementations change. There are some minor inconsistencies with CSS. Just if you're used to CSS Animations, you might know that you can say 0% and 100% and give it the same keyframe properties. Here you have to break it out one line per. But again, they're minor inconsistencies, and but they are just things to know about. And most interesting to me are that it's really cool that we can do a lot of this now. I'm all about doing as much as you can without pulling in a lot of frameworks and libraries, and then you just build on the building blocks. So a lot of the more exciting features are yet to come. So what else is coming? Get all animations. I showed the instance where you say element.animate, you instantly put it into a variable, and then that variable lets you do a lot of that object lets you do whatever you want with it, as far as the play states and everything are concerned. But if you didn't do that, or if you just want to get all of the animations on a page, this is where you do it. And you basically just call document.getAnimations, and it returns an array of all the animations. You can iterate through them and then do whatever actions you would normally do on an animation. So Firefox and Polyfill have this now. And when I say Firefox, I mean the version that is coming out. It's in the dev edition and the nightly editions, just not in the main line yet. Chrome should be releasing this in one of the next couple versions. But for example, I've got these 10 dots that are randomly scaling and opacity and translating, and I can just grab all of them and pause it. So I'm in Chrome right now. This is using the polyfill, but again, it just grabs them, iterates through them, and pauses them all. CSS motion path. This is a very fun one that I've talked to a lot of people about, that we've been wanting for a while and not really sure how it would work. And people who are working on the spec aren't really sure how it's still going to work. But there's a lot of work in it. Chrome actually put out an initial implementation of it, even though the spec was not finalized. And there's talk that it's actually going to be rolled into another spec about polar coordinates, or vice versa. So there is an implementation in Chrome. It's the only browser that has this, but you basically define a SVG path, and then you have an object. So in this case, I've got a circle, and tell it to follow a certain path and give it the offset. So I'm animating from offset 0 to offset 100%, and it just follows the path along that way and animates. There's still a lot to figure out in here, but it's something that has a lot of potential to be useful and fun. Probably mainly fun. So here's a lot of examples on CodePen of people who have started to do things with this. So you got a racetrack, SVG, and then you're doing this race car around here. And again, no JavaScript. This is actually something that started out in the Web Animations API, but they decided to break it out into its own CSS module, which means, again, it can be used in CSS or in JavaScript through the Web Animations API. And that's really where the magic of the Web Animations underlying engines and the way that they're implementing it really is. And there's a lot more coming too. These are kind of smaller pieces, but set keyframes. Firefox has this, and it's basically swap out keyframes in the middle of an animation. So let me actually jump to that one, because that one is kind of hard to explain. Chrome does not have it implemented, and the polyfill does not have it implemented, but Firefox has it implemented. So I've just got a keyframe that is going from 0x to 100x percent, some odd, and then I switch it to go along the y-axis. And so I'm just pressing this button and swapping it, which keyframes. And so if we look at the code, I've got two sets of frames, one that's going from -40 to 40 on the x-axis, and then 0 to 80, again, an 80 vmin difference on the y-axis, and I can just swap between them, and it'll go through. There's a lot of interesting things that can happen here, but again, this is one of the things that is least implemented, so it's more about thinking about right now. There's spacing, how, if you don't specify offsets, and you say, you give it 3 properties, spacing can define how it's spaced out and distributed along time. Composite is something that's interesting because it's about composition, and instead of going, if you specify you want to go from translate 0 to translate 100, and then you say translate 200, you can opt in to say that you actually want that to keep adding. So when you say translate 200 on top of the 100, that's actually going to mean a translate 300. Again, not implemented anywhere, but it's coming. And one of the more exciting things is grouping and sequencing. This is something that is implemented in the polyfill. It is not implemented in any browser yet. But basically, I've got 6 animations going on in 2 groups. Group A has 6 animations on each letter, and Group B has 6 animations, one per letter. And I'm not animating them all at the same time and setting the start time, but I actually set up a group, and I say, I want these 6 animations to start at the same time. Which you can do in other ways, but this, there's always a chance that it might kick off at a different time, whether you're using CSS or JavaScript. So this new way to group actually will just say, I need them all to kick off at the same time. And related is sequencing, which is about one after the other. So you've got a group of 6 animations, and you want them to kick off right after the other. When you're doing this with CSS, you're usually dealing with combining delays, so that the delay of one matches the end time of another, and once you get past a couple of those, that can get very complicated. Here, it's just a matter of, on that one finishing, it will automatically kick off the next one. So there's a lot of potential here, but this is down the road. But it's something to get excited about now. And then this is one thing that they mention, is that timelines might not even be related to time in the future. And what that means is that you can imagine a place, yeah, it's pretty crazy. You could imagine something that takes scrolling as a time. So as you scroll down a page, that's your timeline. Good or bad, that's the option. But those are the kinds of things that they're leaving the spec open to. They're not saying it has to start at this time, and that means milliseconds. It is open, even though what that might mean in the future really hasn't been nailed down. So I've got one last demo, and I think we are doing really well, actually, on time. Okay. So I did this last week because I started thinking animation is a lot of fun for UI and getting your context. And when you're moving from one thing to another, you can, animation can really help with that. It's fun with storytelling. But one thing that I've not really done much with is making a game out of it. And so I started thinking about this old game that I played, I think, on the Commodore 64. And I don't remember anything about it. I learned through discussion on Twitter after I posted this last week that I think I nailed down what the game was. But it's effectively some letters that fall from the top of the screen, and if you have to press the key before they hit the bottom. And so I made a version of this. There's a link to a full version that is on my free Heroku, so it probably will take a little bit of time. There we go. That lets you choose between letters, gestures if you're on a touch device or with a pointer, a mouse, or numbers. But so I can show the code as well. I'm going to jump to a CodePen version. Make sure we got this. Okay. So there's some basic markup and some animation. I actually do have a couple CSS animations in here as well. But all the game logic is centered around the Web Animations API. And so to give you an example of what's happening, you say start, and the V is there, and then I press V, and I'm doing some random 3D transforms as I type these letters and fade them out in the background. But if I let it fall all the way to the ground, I lose one of my little plus marks, which you can see on the bottom of the screen. And as those fade away, I end up losing the game. I know, but I've got to talk too, so I can't just play games. And so what I'm doing here is I'm listening to a lot of different things, a lot of on-finish events. I also didn't mention that this isn't just some letters falling. They're increasing every time one falls. The next one's going to fall a little faster and a little faster until they're all falling at crazy speeds. And so they're just increasing. The delay is shrinking in between them. And this is the JavaScript that it took to make that. So starting here down to here. So it's not light, but it's actually doing quite a bit here. So I'm just going to kind of break down some of the things that I did here. So I'm actually just creating elements on the fly. I'm adding an animation to each element that is created, and I'm offsetting it randomly on the X direction. It's always going to fall directly down, and then I have a CSS animation that's also making it waver back and forth. So you see here, I'm doing an animation. Let me go ahead and bump the size a little bit. I create an element with a random letter. I do an animation on that with a random X value between 0 and 85. And I have it go down from negative 2.5 VH to 82.5 VH, which is approximately the top of the black to the bottom of the black. Starts off at 10-second duration, but that, well, that's actually a constant. And it's just doing a linear animation, and it fills both. So it starts at the beginning and it ends at the bottom. Then I set up an on-finish listener. So if the animation finishes, which means it reached the bottom, I do my logic of I missed a letter, decrease my life count, and handle it if I've reached the max number of misses. And then I have my end game animation, which I call get all animations, and I pause all of them. So it might be hard to see, but there are some letters that are still floating back and forth. They haven't continued going down, which is because I paused the Web Animation API animation, which was the one that goes down. So I pause them so that they can't finish and cause any issues there. And at that point, the only thing left is the on-press event, which listens, finds the character I pressed, and if I press the right one, it pops the animation off of a list of animations that I'm keeping track of and does this extra random stuff. So I get 3 different degrees, one for rotate X, one for rotate Y, and one for rotate Z. Just some random numbers that come out of there. And then I do a transform from normal to transform of crazy rotation. and then I do a random duration, and those are the kinds of things that you can do with CSS, but you're either going to have to lose some of the variability, or you're going to have to use JavaScript to generate your CSS keyframes on the fly. Here, it's all boiled down to one function that sends all of these animations going. And then I just have some score keeping, and that's it. So it's not just about UI. You can do a lot of different things with it. And I think it's something that can be fun to explore. So the obvious question is, have we done it? Have we solved all of our animation needs? And just as that was obviously the question I was going to ask, the next obvious answer is no. But it's progress. It's something new. There is a polyfill, so it helps us to start exploring it now. And it's laying a solid foundation for all these browsers to build everything on top of it. CSS animation, JS animation. Originally SVG animation as well, but Chrome has decided to deprecate that. So it's likely going to boil down to a lot of CSS and JavaScript animation. But that foundation is going to be there, and let everything tie into the same. So if you want to know more, this was exciting. I just made this slide today because last night, Rachel Neighbors, who, if you've ever done anything with animation, you've likely read some of her stuff or seen some of her talks. She just wrapped up some Mozilla Developer Network documentation for it, which was sorely needed. So she wrapped that yesterday, and so that documentation is ready. There's a Slack channel that Rachel Neighbors also set up called Animation at Work. If you're wanting to know more about some of the techniques and also some of the why, I would recommend the UI Animation newsletter. Val Head runs that, and there's always a lot of interesting things in there. And there's been a couple of episodes of Shop Talk Show with Chris Coyer and Austin's own Dave Rupert that have focused on animation as well, specifically 216 and 203. So I would recommend checking out any of those. And if you want to hit up some of the things that I've worked on, here's my code pen, my Twitter, and the slides for this talk. Well, thank you very much.